Today I'm going to talk to you about DM burnout, what it is, why it happens, but more importantly, I'm going to give you some real practical advice on how to turn it around. You're probably not going to like everything that I have to say. It's pretty strong medicine, but I'm going to tell you what works. And what is DM burnout? Well, why does it happen? This is a game we love. If you're a dungeon master, you already know how much you love this game. You take on a really challenging role. You take on a big workload to make these games happen, to get your players to the table, to make sure each and every player has a little something for them in your sessions. You work really hard at this and you really enjoy it. That's obvious. You can't get very far as a dungeon master if you don't really love it. It is a labor of love. But you're at the end of a session and you're looking down, you're putting away your books, you're putting your minis back in the case, you're gathering up your dice, and one of the players kind of had to rush out the door because he game ran a little late and he had something he had to get to. Always seems like there's something he has to get to. He's kind of out the door, and another one of your players looks up and kind of pats you on the back and says, "Hey, thanks, Jeff. Good game. That was really fun." And two or three other players putting their books back in their backpacks. They kind of look up and they say, "Yeah, thanks for the game. That was a lot of fun." And you get all your stuff together. A couple of your players maybe help you take some things out to your car. You throw your mini case on the seat, your map cases if you have any, your dice and all that stuff. You load it in your car, turn the key, start driving homeward, and you just feel empty inside. This feeling hits you like exhaustion, like a kind of bone tired, just an offness. You get home, you feel vaguely sad. I used to call it post-game depression, but when it's real strong, what it really is burnout. A few days pass, you're looking at your desk, you've got the next session coming up, you've got a plan for this, you've got things to do, but you look at your stack of books, you look at your D&D folder, you look at your desk, your work area, whatever it is, and it's the last place you want to sit. It's the last thing you want to do. What happened? You love this game, you like your players, you've built up a really cool campaign, but you don't want to run a game right now. You don't want to do it. You've got DM burnout. So why is it happening? What do we do about it? Let's get right into it. If you're starting to feel burnt out on running games, if it's starting to feel like a chore, a grind, like tedium, I'm willing to bet it's not happening at the beginning of a campaign that started at first level, where maybe you're 8 sessions in and the players just caught a glimpse of the mysterious figure in a red cloak that's going to turn out to be the sorcerer's stepfather, that's going to turn out to be the big bad evil guy around session 8. I bet this isn't happening in the early days of a campaign. I bet it's happening much later. And that's because one of the biggest reasons for DM burnout is high-level play. You are probably starting to notice that it's getting harder and harder to run the combats, and it's getting harder and harder to come up with creative and interesting ways to challenge a party of adventurers that have become more and more like superheroes with a seemingly inexhaustible pool of resources. Not only that, but high level play is demanding a lot on your brain, a lot of processing power. You have to keep track of a lot more abilities that your characters now have, how those interact with the abilities they already have and with the abilities of the other players at the table. You are running more and more complex monsters, and you're dealing with more and more complex spells on the battlefield. And there's all this adjudication, all this information you have to take in round to round and process, and that can get very taxing. Doing that for several hours, the end of that, no wonder you feel a kind of this heaviness, this feeling in your head of, oh man, kind of a sense of exhaustion. So that's where your burnout might be coming from. So what do you do about it? Well, there's a couple solutions I'm gonna suggest if your burnout, if you think it's coming from high level play and the complexity that's being put on you as a dungeon master to run those kind of games. Um, First solution, I would say, is that high level play is not for everyone. It is a different game. And what you might need to do is plan a suitable ending for that campaign and get there and let your players know. Let your players know, like, hey, um, I want to start a new campaign. I want to kind of bring these heroes to a satisfying end. It doesn't even have to be the end. We could always come back to these characters with epic one-shots or maybe a new campaign later on. But I really need to start simple again. I need to get back to basics and start a campaign, maybe in a different world, a different setting, or with a different style. You might just need to get back into those lower levels where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you can run a great game. You might feel lost in the higher levels. Um, Along those lines, the the other solution to this is to realize, to admit to yourself that high level play is different than lower level play, and then to radically change your game. You've got to do things very different at the high levels. First of all, you've got to recognize that the traditional challenges that maybe you really enjoy are not going to challenge your players very much at all. You might really love scenarios where an orc horde attacks the village and there's a kind of a glorious stand where the players have to hold a gap to keep the orcs at bay. You might really like, 4 or 5 trolls chasing your characters through a swamp. There's a lot of classic stuff that's great about Dungeons and Dragons that you might really like that just isn't going to challenge your players at all at high level. They're just going to cakewalk anything that is like a frontal assault, anything that's kind of bread and butter combat. Big groups of combatants that don't have spellcasters, that don't have access to things like Dispel Magic, or battlefield control spells, your parties are just going to start wiping the floor with the kind of standard encounters that used to be a lot of fun and interesting. So accepting that, there's kind of two things about accepting that fact. One is that it's okay. These are high level characters. They're not supposed to be challenged by things like this, by the same things that used to challenge them. It is okay for a group of high level characters with smiles on their face to confound and thwart and send running a pack of 300 orcs. It's glorious. If you are in the wrong mindset about it, if you're thinking, oh, I wanted this to be a challenging, like a scary encounter, like there's so many orcs, like I pulled out every mini I have and poker chips and dice, and I made this gigantic horde, and they're coming from 3 different directions because that's gonna mess up that wall of fire thing they usually do, and then they're gonna have to spread out their control, and this is gonna be like a horde. It's gonna be like a swarm battle, and the bad guys don't even make it to the players because the druid cast plant growth, and then they just boo 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 boo, like. Encounters like this, your players are just going to dominate. And the thing is, here's the thing. Your players are going to have fun in this situation. They are going to love the fact that no orc got within 60 feet of them. For 5 rounds of blasting and cooking and utter destruction that they were never in danger. And your players are going to love that. They're going to love it. As long as it's not every session, every battle, they're going to talk about it. They're going to be thrilled. It's a chance for them to feel mighty and to flex their muscles and what they can really do and hold off. But you as a dungeon master, you might be thinking like, oh, I thought that was going to be like challenging. So the thing is like, not every battle, you got to kind of stop looking at every battle as this needs to be challenging and meaningful and push the players. If you're doing that, you gotta dial that back as you come into high level play, and you gotta really get onto your players' side and have fun with them and revel in their victories, because they are gonna have big victories as they figure out how to work together, use those spells and those high level abilities to maximum effect, and especially if they're team players and they're really working together, they're gonna really dominate some stuff, and you're gonna be surprised at how much you can throw at them and without making them break a sweat. And that's fine. They are gonna actually have fun. And if you sort of take the burden off of yourself to always challenge with every encounter, or even within an entire session, like, there doesn't have to be anything challenging in every particular session, especially high level play. Along with that, with kind of speaking of that, in high level play, it helps to step away from combat, to present your characters, your group, with challenges that are not solved by combat. Present them with role play encounters and moral dilemmas and things like that. Um, I once had a high level group where they spent most of a session in a conversation with a high priest, and they loved this session. It was a really cool session. Um, they had been gallivanting around with this elven king. They had become friends with him. This was an NPC. You get those NPCs that you can tell your players actually like them and care about them, and that's gold for you as a dungeon master. You're like, yes, it's like I'm like they care about this NPC, and they had fought side by side with him before. They really liked him, and in this particular session, this high priest of the realm pulled them aside and had a private conversation with them about the king, about this king that they really knew and loved and cared about. And in this conversation, he brought up a lot of flaws about this king, and he did it in a really compelling and truthful way. And he kind of advised the players, like, hey, this king wants to go to war, over here with these people who have been traditional enemies. They've been raiding the borders. They've been causing problems. But you need to stop him. And the thing is, the players wanted this battle too. They're adventurers. They want to go off. They want to fight. They want to be part of this new campaign against, this campaign against evil. But this high priest is warning, like, I've seen in visions, if we do this, bad things are going to happen to the realm. Like, we don't want this war, not right now. And the king loves you. He cares about you. He views you as heroes. You have to convince him to stop. And that kind of tipped off some really cool role play, some really cool dilemmas, and it had nothing to do with battle, and it had nothing to do with the levels of the characters. I mean, unless they're going to straight up use charm magic on the king, which they were not about to do, it becomes a moral dilemma. It becomes a problem that isn't solved by combat or spells. And the more you can do that at the high levels, the more they will go smoothly for you. Now, that's not going to work for every group. Some groups don't love an entire session of role play. Like, to them, it doesn't feel like D&D if there's not at least a fight, and they'd rather have 2 or 3. And that's fine. That's a stylistic thing. And you as a DM might not feel like you have the role-playing chops to just sit there and have conversations in character with your players for, hours on end and keep them entertained. And that's fine too. That's not something you need to do. But if you can do that, it's a really cool way to handle high-level play. If you can start thinking about how to create really fun role-playing moments and dilemmas that have to be solved by having clever conversations and talking to different people and setting things up in a cool way without even rolling dice, that's a good way to break up the tedium of some of the combat in high-level play. Ironically, your players get all these abilities at high level, but to really challenge them, You need to hit them with things that have nothing to do with those abilities, that have everything to do with what their characters know, with what they know as players, and, just asymmetrical role playing challenges are really fun at those high levels. So, listen, for high level stuff, uh, it's not for everyone. It is a different game. It helps to admit that. And that change happens a lot sooner than you would think. My last video I talk about how that change, you really start to feel it around 8th or ninth level. I'll put a link to that at the end of this one. But anyways, to recap, if it's the high level, if it's the complexity, if it's the pressure to challenge your characters that is hitting you, that is probably why you're feeling a bit burnt out. And the things you can do, try to up the role playing, try to up the exploration, try to up any aspect of the game that hasn't to do with out and out combat, and at the same time, let go of the idea, at least for a while, at least for 3 or 4 sessions, let go of the idea that you have to piece together some interesting combination of crazy complicated monsters and spells that's going to end up being a good battle. Just do some simple bread and butter battles where the party wipes the floor in 2 rounds, and just take the weight off your shoulders. That's my advice there if you're getting burnout from the high level play. Next up, I want to talk about adversarial or disrespectful players. People at your table who are not very nice, who are not treating you well, who are not respecting the love and the work that you put in when you bring a game to your table, whether it's every week, every 2 weeks, every month, every 6 weeks. Whatever it is, it's a lot of work and a lot of care and thought and love goes into it. And if you have somebody at your table, or worse yet, you have a general culture at your table where that doesn't feel respected, where you don't feel a warm welcome when you come in the room, that's a huge problem, and that is a huge source of burnout. That'll maybe burn you out quicker than anything. That general feeling of it's almost like a tail between the legs feeling when you realize you're doing most of the work and you are receiving the smallest share of respect and appreciation. It's not great, to say the least. So with this situation, okay, like this is going to be a short one because there's really only one way about this. Look, don't give your best to someone who barely deserves your least. You can't be expending your energy, your effort, your care, and concern to people that couldn't be bothered when it comes back to you, when it comes in your direction. So look, here's the problem. It's if you have a player that's constantly calling you out on rules issues, maybe with a tone, or anything with a tone. Maybe it's a player that is constantly antagonizing your NPCs in a way that doesn't make any sense for their character. It's literally just that person using their character to be an a-hole, using their character to express a need to bully others, using their character to push people around or to just be a class clown. You really need to pull that person aside and, step one, without putting any emotion or moral judgment on it, you need to define the thing that's bothering you, and you need to tell them, like, hey, every time I bring an NPC in, whether it's the court magician or the king himself or the local mayor or the constable, you start snickering, you make fun of their accent, or you make fun of their name. You're always in the background. And because it's always happening, and because it's always a distraction while I'm trying to kind of come out of my shell and role play, or whatever it is, like, hey, like, I need you to tone that down. Like, that actually makes me feel bad. Like, as the person behind that character. That's very distracting for me. Or if it's somebody who is very rudely calling you out on rules, or wants to have arguments about rules. Listen, I would not broach. I would just not tolerate rules arguments at my table if I were you. That needs to be a ground rule that you set in session zero. We don't argue about rules during the game. If there's a rules question, raise your hand. Like, let me know. I'll ask you. You'll say, and if I want to talk about it right there, I'll talk about it. If I don't, we'll talk about it after the game. We can, we can text about it later. We can talk about it later. But arguing at the table about a rules or a ruling, it's like the DM, their rule is final during the game, and then after the game, if they were wrong, we can retcon some things, we can talk about it, we can set a standard moving forward. But just having it out at the table, if you have a player that is always wanting to have it out with you, that's a huge problem. You need to talk to them about that. Whatever the behavior is that hits you, that really grates on you, that really feels disrespectful, I always say talk to the player first. And you are instantly, this talk that you have, even if it's awkward, even if it's, even if maybe it's not perfect, you need to kind of like take the pressure off yourself to have a perfect conversation about this. You need to just let yourself feel what you're feeling and say it to that person. Try not to be over the top. Try not to be, aggressive yourself, but say it. Say what you're really feeling. Say what's really bothering you. And this is going to instantly separate the wheat from the chaff. A good person, after that conversation, a person that belongs at your table is going to go out of their way to correct themselves. And in fact, they're going to circle around, they're going to fall back with you and like say, hey man, once again, sorry, like I was trying to play this like asshole bard. That's what I was going for, but I didn't realize that like I was being disruptive. Like I was trying to go over the top. And so, but anyways, I'm glad you said something like, how was the last game? Like, was that good? Like I dialed it way back and, I'm kind of, they're going to have that follow up. They're going to be really respectful. They're going to be really open to what you have to say because they want to be at your table. They want to stay in the group. The person who does not belong at your table, you're going to have this great conversation. They're going to, yeah, I totally get it. And it's funny. Hopefully you're going to feel great after the conversation. But, when you get back to the game table, it's going to be like that conversation never happened. It's going to be the same old person doing the same old things that you asked them not to do. Okay, so with these people, you need to cut them out of the game. And you need to do it immediately. Like if you are in an online game and you have someone who is doing this to you, kick them. Just kick them without the conversation. It's your game. It's your game. And if it's if it's a person that's it's a live game, I would avoid the drama of just you don't want to like stand up and rage fire or rage quit yourself. It's just that doesn't help anybody. Just don't invite them to the next game. Just make sure they're not invited. Make sure they get a message from you. If you feel like you can talk to them and say, "Hey, I don't want to play. Like we're done." If that's what you can do, but make the communication somehow and get them out of your game. And if the whole table has a toxic culture, have the talk, see who improves. You will know who is genuinely cheering for you and on your side. You'll know it. They will show you with actions. Kick the rest. When you bring a game of Dungeons and Dragons to the table, you're bringing your effort, you're bringing your heart, you're bringing your best. Don't share that table with someone that doesn't appreciate it. They don't belong there. All right, so number 3 reason you might be burning out is constant distractions. This is a little bit different than the disruptive or disrespectful players that I talked about earlier because Distracting behavior, oftentimes it's totally innocent. The players don't realize how much they are getting under your skin, just how hard they are making it for you to run your game well by creating all these little distractions and interruptions. So, with distractions, the key to this is notice that it's happening and then get back to the basics of good table manners. Lay that out for your group. This is something you should always do in your session zero, but it's something you have to touch upon. Sometimes you have to go back to it and you have to re-explain it. There's a lot of things you can do to lessen distractions at the table. You could have a no phone rule, but that's going to be hard for some people, but some people need that. And your game might really improve if you say, "Hey, no phones at the table. We're gonna have a break every 2 hours or every hour and a half, and you can go check your phone and play on your phone." Or you can have your phone. You can glance down at it. If somebody feels like, well, what if there's an emergency? There's never an emergency, but yeah, you can look at your text during game, but I don't want to see you texting during games. Maybe that's the source of distraction is devices. Another thing can be just you're in that groove of combat where you're explaining the actions of the monsters and the outcomes of character actions, and then people just keep going oh, he's flanked. Oh, he's flanked. No, you forgot to give him advantage because he's flanked, and then immediately someone's like, I've sentinel. Can I make my sentinel attack? And this can be kind of happening, boom, 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 so much. There is a huge mental processing cost to interrupting a thought process and then shifting to another thought process to resolve another problem, and then jumping back to the thought process where you left off on it so that you can continue forward, and then to be immediately interrupted by something else. And so if this is happening a lot at your games, this kind of interruption, again, table manners. You might want to set up a raise your hand policy. If it's not your turn and you have a comment, raise your hand. I am a big fan of having a little bit of a code here. Maybe raise your hand if it's a rules thing, or raise one finger if it's a reaction. And that way, I, as the dungeon master, if it's a rules thing, I might finish my thought and then circle back to you. If it's a reaction thing, I might finish my sentence and then immediately turn and say, "What's up? What do you got? Is it your you want to use protection style? Cool, I gotcha. Here's the roll. Here's the disadvantage on that roll." That's one thing that can help you. Another thing you might want to do is you might want to institute that during combat on a player's round, the only people allowed to talk are the dungeon master and that player. Let that player, that's a spotlight. And of course, the exception is if that player wants to turn to another player and RP a communication, or if the dungeon master has a question for another player at the table. Of course, it's what it is. It's kind of like don't speak unless spoken to kind of thing that you put in combats. Now, if you do that, it can make combats feel a little bit tense and heavy. There's two things you want to do if you do this. You never want to discourage the kind of when somebody rolls a 20, you're not trying to discourage that, and you need to let your players know that. Hey guys, I'm not asking you guys to not respond. I want you guys to cheer. I want you to have fun. I want you to laugh and grin and keep your heads up. I just don't want you interrupting the flow of what me and the current player are trying to do for our turn. So that's what you're going for. You're not trying to shut down happiness and celebration. The other thing is if you're going to do it this way, kind of a rapid fire round around, giving each player their moment where everybody is kind of supposed to not interrupt, you want to give the group these moments where they're just free form allowed to talk. It's great at the beginning of a battle. It's great maybe 3 or 4 rounds into a battle that is evolving into a larger, more complicated fight. Maybe it started off as just a fight with a bunch of hill giants, and now a frost giant just rode in on a white dragon, and so okay, it's really good to have these moments where you give the group 2 minutes and you just say, hey guys, I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to talk amongst yourselves and figure out what you want to do. It's not realistic. It's a strategy planning session in the middle of a chaotic battle, but it's great for your players, and it'll help them out. It'll help them have that kind of wild, chaotic interaction around the table during a fight. But it puts it in a spot where it's not going to drive you crazy, and it's not going to be a constant source of interruptions. Another tip about interruptions is you might have a rules lawyer. You might have someone that catches everything you miss, and this is not a disrespectful player. This is well-meaning, and if you have a person like this at your table, they might be driving you crazy because they're interrupting you, or they're interrupting the current player's turn to tell you something that you already know. Like you already know you've got to get back and make that person's saving throw. But they might also be telling you things you forgot, genuinely. And so a good tip is to get the rules lawyer on your side. Let that person know, just like hey, thank you for catching all this stuff. Sometimes it's kind of an interruption, so I suck at remembering to make saving throws at the beginning of the bad guys' rounds when they're they're in the Hunger of Hadar spell. Can you really help me out on that? And do me a favor, just kind of like wave at me, and if I don't get it, then like tell me, but just like give me a chance, like wave at me and let me nod at you, so that you're not interrupting my flow if I'm trying to explain something before I get around to that thing. You can kind of get with your rules lawyer, get them on your side, and get them communicating to you about the things that will really help you out in a way that doesn't disrupt you. Constant disruptions, especially in the chaotic kind of thought-filled moments of running battles, will really burn you out. If that's just the normal at your table, that can really be burning you out over time without you even realizing that's what's up. So definitely want to minimize the distractions. I have a couple general tips now on just turning burnout around. Just a couple things I want to close with. So let's get to those next. I've got a couple more pieces of general advice about DM burnout and how you can turn it around. And I would love to hear from you guys down in the comment section about a time where you got really burned out with the game, and what was it that brought you back? What was it that got you excited? Was it a new edition? Was it a new book? Was it a new campaign? Was it something else? Would really like to hear from you guys about that. So for me, I think one of the biggest things about DM burnout that you can do when you start to feel it, when you start to feel overwhelmed, you start to maybe dread your games, you feel that burnout coming on. I think one of the best things that you can do as a dungeon master to keep yourself excited is to ask more of your players. And what I mean by that is, if you're showing up to these games on time and you're putting together these crazy combat scenarios and you're keeping track of all this stuff, and meanwhile your players they're just sort of rolling out of bed and just plopping down in the chair, there's this really big imbalance of the effort that's being put into the game. And that's always going to be the case with dungeon masters and players. But there's a lot that your players can do to help you. And they would love to do it, especially if they knew it would help you stay interested in running their game. A couple things you could have your players do. You could have a player in charge of tracking the initiative order in fights. You could, whether you use like a whiteboard, like an initiative board thing, or I know some people like to do a DM screen where they have little fold cards that they can move around where they have the initiative order. Give a player a screen with the little initiative things. Let them move them around, and you can look across the table at it, and you can see who's going to be next. I mean, let the player announce whose turn it is next. I mean, let them have fun with it. There's there's players who would not want to do that, but there are just as many players who people who love to organize. Like, let them organize, let them help you at the table. There are players who would absolutely love to help you track initiative, to have that little extra job to help the combats go smoother. You could have a player in charge of tracking spell durations for you. Another thing you could do in big combats, something I do, if there are some good NPCs, maybe some town guardsmen or militia or some rangers that are kind of helping out the party, I will get the simplified stat blocks for those NPCs, and I'll give them to the players, and I'll ask them. I'll have them roll initiative for those guys. I'll have them roll their attacks, their saving throws, everything, track their hit points. Your players can really do a lot to help you as a dungeon master keep things moving. And you just have to ask them. There are helpful people at your table who would love to take a little bit of the load off you. And sometimes us dungeon masters, we're just used to putting our nose to the grindstone and tracking a lot of things and powering through, and we don't think to ask for help. And I think you really should think of ways that you can get help when you're there at the table. And it could be something silly too, as easy as just like, can you get me a Pepsi? Like, I'm trapped in here. I've got a table on my right. I've got a desk in front of me. I've got my miniature set up over here, and this thing's open, and I've got books laid out on these chairs over here. I've got a swivel chair with like the player's handbook open with like Tasha's stacked on top of it, and like it's a big freaking production for me to get up, and you've got a Pepsi, and like, could you get me a Pepsi next time you get a Pepsi? I'm stuck back here. It's not like a prima donna thing. It's just looking for ways that you can have your players help you out every game. Giving people little jobs is stuff that's really going to help you out. The other big piece of advice for DM burnout is that if you're feeling miserable about playing, if you're feeling really anxious and down about it, and the feeling isn't going away, that's enough to signal to you that you need to do something. And one of the most powerful things you can do is immediately take a break. I'm not saying in the middle of the game. I'm saying that, like, the game wraps up. It's been 2 or 3 games in a row. You felt this way, and just clear your schedule, and it can be indefinite. This isn't a job for most people. I run professional games. That's a little different. But if you're just running games for your friends, your family, your hobby shop, the local game shop, whatever it is, you're not signed up for torture, for mental for a big mental burden. That's not what you signed up for, and that's not what people would want you to go through. If you're having a rough time, if you're having writer's block, if you're having burnout, just take some time off from the game. Take a month off, and take 2 months off. Dude, make it indefinite. Remove the commitments that are weighing down on your shoulder, because that's another big thing about being a dungeon master. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed by our commitment and the expectation that we're going to put on this big entertaining thing, and we're going to be consistent, and we're going to be on time, and we're going to land all the punches. But really, you might just need a break. And one of the things that gets me excited about playing when I'm feeling burnout is to take a break from dungeon mastering and to actually play the game as a player. Um, I was very fortunate in one of my real life games, my kind of this long running real life game. One of my friends in the game is a good dungeon master, and he had this idea that he really wanted to run with the group we were running with. I was like, yeah, I got an NPC. I'll make him my character. I'm all about it. And this player ended up running this whole little mini story arc. It was about 6 or 7 long adventures to complete this whole story arc that he had created. And so I took 6+ sessions off and got to just be a player. And by the end of that, I was absolutely itching to get back into the DM's chair. Something about being at the table with the player, you get excited by what the other dungeon master is doing. You think about their techniques. You think about how you could use that, and it just for me, it gets my juices flowing. Makes me want to play a game. It makes me want to run a game. And so for you guys, biggest advice for burnout: ask your players for help and be a player for a while. Take a break, play the game. So, guys, if you love what I'm doing, please consider dropping me a like, a comment, subscribe. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching.